Hello and welcome to the Ammo Hour, episode 7. Thanks to everybody for tuning in today. I don't know how you found the podcast, but if you're watching and want to follow us online, please check out at the Ammo Hour on Instagram. Or if you're listening and want to watch it, do the same, and the links are in the bio there, so you can watch on YouTube. Today we have an awesome guest. There's a lot going on right now with NASA and Mars and the Chinese, the Arab Emirates, and America are obviously up there. There's a lot of talk about disclosure. Earlier in the year, the Pentagon confirmed that they did have some craft that they weren't able to identify, which officially means it was a UFO. I think there's some interesting stuff going on here. This isn't a conspiracy theory podcast, but it's a subject that I'm really interested in. And I think there's stuff up there that's been covered up already. I won't get into it right here. My next guest doesn't embellish me too much on that, but he does work at NASA as an astrobiologist. His name is Gronstal. And as much as I tried to turn the conversation that way, he's a little more scientific in his approach. However, what's going on just now with these Mars landings and the research, I personally think, due to other things I listen to and read, that we're going to get some pretty interesting things coming back pretty soon. Who knows? That's just my hot tip. Aaron is an awesome dude. He's from the States, lives here in Glasgow. I met him just through the Denniston community where I live, and yeah, we talked about a lot of things here. Listening back, I'm maybe being a little unfair. I talk about some societal issues about America that I've just not really been able to wrap my head around before, like the crazy gun laws and things like that. And it might sound a little bit like I'm kind of putting that on him, and that wasn't my intention at all. We know each other, so he knows that as well. We chatted for a little bit after we stopped recording. But for the listener, yeah, please don't think I was putting him to task for some errors of his country. I mean, that's not for him to answer to. I just wondered if he could give a little bit of insight into that. But anyway, yeah, we chat about a lot of things. His job at NASA, ancient civilizations in America, the political landscape over there, etc, etc. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this conversation. He's an absolute legend. As I said, check us out online at the Ammo Hour on Instagram, and from there you'll find the link to our YouTube. I'm not going to tell you the URL until I get a custom one, so please subscribe to allow me to get one. So it's not just youtube.com/KWSIG. As always, I'd like to thank you by listening and giving you 20% off at the merch store. Again, that link is on the Instagram page, but it is the ammocollective.bigcartel.com, and you can get 20% off anything there, t-shirts or hoodies, by entering the Ammo Hour at checkout. Had quite a few people use the code already, so that's awesome to think you're listening and then you're going to get a piece of merch. So honestly, thanks so much. Obviously right now there is no work for me, so every little helps, and I really appreciate it. Hope you're all doing sweet out there. Not much longer of this lockdown, I hope. Looks like April, end of April, till we start getting a bit of normality. So yeah, at least the sun's out now. We can start looking down to that. But yeah, it's been a long ride there. So here we go. Episode 7 of the Ammo Hour. Thanks so much for watching. Okay, I'm here with Aaron Gronstal, my buddy. How are you, man? You okay?
Yeah, doing well.
How are you dealing with all this lockdown shenanigans?
I don't know. I mean, I'm a bit of an introvert, so it's kind of, I think it's almost my natural state of being to just kind of lock myself in a room and do my own thing. I've done that a lot as a kid, so in that sense I've kind of dealt with it, but I also know that that's not particularly healthy for me because it comes too easy. So I've been trying to kind of force myself to get out and at least go for a social distance walk with friends and that kind of stuff every once in a while.
Yeah, you say that, man, but also I'll give you a wee intro in a minute, but since I've known you, you've always been, whether you were just making new friends, new to the area or stuff, you've always been at the local bar or kind of going and doing your outdoorsy things. So yeah, maybe not surrounded by 100 strangers or stuff. Maybe you're cool in your own company, but still, like, not being able to go to like different places than the four walls or the park's pretty tough, huh?
Yeah, no, that is definitely true. I'm
Yeah.
definitely looking forward to when we can actually get up back to the hills and stuff.
100%, man. Yeah, because I'm the same, man. Like I've got a wee place I can go to in Rannoch and stuff, but I don't drive, so jumping in the train, it just feels irresponsible because I'm coming from Glasgow, and there's people that properly will be going up there for work and stuff, and it's not really fair, is it?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, glad you could jump on and talk, man. Because yeah, we have a cool relationship in terms of just being friendly dudes. But like, you've got a really interesting background, so it'll be cool to chat. So yeah, you're a contractor on the astrobiology program at NASA,
Yep, yep.
which is some chap line.
Yeah, I still can't, like, every once in a while, don't really know how I ended up there. But yeah, I've actually been at NASA since 2000, 2001, something like that. I mean, it's been a while. I was still in school when I started there. So
Mad. So you're from Iowa, yeah?
yeah, yeah.
So how, in relation to like NASA, is NASA not Texas?
NASA's kind of all over the U.S. It's not in Iowa. I mean, I guess there's like at the Science Center in Des Moines, there's some things, and there's like, but NASA funds researchers. Like like our job is to fund kind of research around the country in astrobiology science. So we fund a lot of like, university labs and stuff like that. So you can find NASA researchers sort of everywhere. But yeah, I didn't really get involved in NASA until I went to university, and I went to university in Berkeley in California, and sort of got involved through the NASA Ames Research Center. So NASA has kind of bases all over, and Houston, the Johnson Space Center in Houston's famous because that's mission control. So that's what you see like in Apollo 13 and stuff in the movies. And then
Yeah.
there's Kennedy in Florida where all the big launches happen and stuff. But there's also like JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratories in Pasadena, so kind of in LA, and that's where a lot of robotics happens and that kind of stuff. And then there's the Ames Research Center in Mountain View, so kind of San Francisco Bay Area, and that's a lot of some robotics, some like a lot of life sciences, a lot of the biology, that kind of stuff. It's where like a lot of the supercomputer development happens. So it's right in Silicon Valley, and that's sort of why Silicon Valley's there in a sense. Or it's
Right.
part,
Yeah.
because a lot of that funding for some of that basic research on, on computers basically happened there. And then there's like the Goddard Space Center is another big one for astrobiology. That's kind of in Maryland, sort of in the DC metro area. And NASA headquarters is in DC. So there's bases.
Yeah, all over. So like for an absolute layman, because like I'm sure I'll be, in the majority of people when you hear NASA, you just think, right, well, they go to space, like, what else is there? But like astrobiology sounds pretty exciting. Like, is it concerned with life in space? Is it?
Sort of. It's more so, like in a general sense, astrobiology is studying the origin of life on Earth and the evolution of life, and then the potential for life in space, in the universe. So it's sort of studying how life happened here and what it is and how it works, and trying to understand whether or not that could happen someplace else as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting, man. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if that'd be your worst nightmare or like, or if you'd share some of these things, but we've touched on it before. But like, I'm interested in a lot of guys like, Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. So like, they're not only theorists of like a lost civilization, a lost generation and stuff, but they also look at like geology of the world. They're very like, they call themselves like historical like journalists, because they're not saying this is definitely what happened, but they're saying there's a lot of anomalies, like things like, for example, the Sphinx having like water erosion up to its nose, which shows, there was flood to that level and things like that. All these ancient civilizations having knowledge of astrology like far out with what apparently they should have been with, like stone tools and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you think there is missing links? Do you think there is chapters
there's always a
lost?
possibility, like with that kind of stuff. Like I'm not really familiar with like the Sphinx thing, and I'd have to go back and see what the evidence was of that,
Yeah.
and stuff, because talk to some kind of geologists and archaeologists about how some of that happens, because sometimes you see stuff like that and it looks like it could be that, and so people make that assumption, but then when you really examine it, you find other possibilities.
Yeah.
I mean, for us, that was a big thing with, like, in the 90s with the Mars meteorite, the Allen Hills meteorite that came, and there was a team at Johnson, at NASA, that thought they found fossils in it of microbes. So it was just like not actual material left by the microbe, but patterns in the rock that microbes would have created that were left over. So like the microbe dies and is gone, but like you have like this tube shape in the rock, and it looks like tube shapes that you see on Earth. So they kind of went from there to say, like, okay, there's life. Like these are things that we see microbes on Earth making and everything. And like it caused a huge stir. President Clinton made the announcement that we found life on Mars and all that kind of stuff. But then geochemists started looking at it and saying, well, actually, like when you look at the conditions on Mars and the type of rock and like if you had like this chemical reaction, you can get these exact same things purely from chemistry without biology. And the things that you're seeing look like what you see on Earth, but they're way smaller. So you're getting to the point where, like, if they're created the same way they were created by life on Earth, they're too small because you wouldn't have room to fit the DNA and like all the pieces that you need to have a cell. So like jumping to saying that, oh, it's definitely life, rather than like it's probably actually just the chemistry, like
Yeah.
like
Yeah, man.
you have to
I'm
get
just
all
so
the opinions,
Yeah, for sure, man. There's like, I think the answer is probably somewhere in between. Like, I really am, and I'll share some things, like not to try and it's never with me like, oh no, you should believe it. It's just like this is really interesting.
Yeah.
Like I don't subscribe to it was good watching when you were young, like Ancient Aliens, and that's not what I'm talking about. It's like guys who have basically, because they've handed out master's degrees over like decades and stuff of this is the archaeology, like there's not people wanting to admit that they might be wrong because obviously they
Yeah.
made their career in that. But that's not saying that they were wrong. They were right with what they had in front of them, but new
Yeah,
things come out.
that's an important point too, because you have to be like, there's a big problem in science in terms, it almost goes back to kind of that colonialist attitude of, we have this knowledge, like the Native American. I mean, I'm originally American, so that's kind of my framework. But like, you go to the Americas, and there's all this knowledge with indigenous people there that just gets bowled over, by this kind of colonialist attitude of like, we're right, you're wrong kind of thing. And there is like a ton of knowledge that was lost because of that,
100%, yeah.
And looking back, it's really hard to interpret some of that. And there's a lot of that knowledge that still exists that we're still ignoring and we don't have access to because because of all the systemic sort of problems with racism and exclusion and stuff in education. And yeah, a lot of that knowledge that we're missing out on. So it is important to like always check yourself and say like, well, how much of these assumptions, like I'm not going to completely discount the idea that there was a flood that,
of course, yeah.
There's like how much of that actual history did we lose because we ignored it?
100%. No, the first link I'll share with you, just to give you a wee entry point to that, is Graham Hancock's book. It's his most recent book, but it's called America First. And he actually theorizes that was one of, the greatest early pre-flood, because there's a lot of evidence. This guy, Randall Carlson, is like one of his partners, and they go around the Americas looking at the giant, like, carving out of, the scablands and everything like that. And, that these were, these huge boulders were brought with, like, mass floods and things like that, and looking at, ancient... America, Mesoamerica and stuff, the Mexica and the Maya and stuff, who all, their temples and everything like that were all said to be by their ancestors. They weren't the ones that claimed to have built it. And, there's a lot of this shared thing happens all over. And then you've got like Dogon tribe in Ethiopia who, are a hunter-gatherer level, but they have, exact knowledge of the Pleiades, the seven sisters, which is what the Inca and the Egyptians all build their temples in line with. And you're like, well, how? How? Like,
Yeah.
could it have been? I know it can get far-fetched, but if we're getting to the point now, I mean, the statistics in terms of how many universes and atmospheres statistically could hold life. Not saying they do, but could it be, if we're getting to the point we can start to travel and stuff, could there have been, somebody who's come and give people a leg up, and then, that's so long in our past that's then been wiped out and we don't have memory of that, but we see these ancient technologies and like buildings that look like, they're laser cut to the perfect degree, and like stones the weight of which cranes today couldn't lift them, and they're up on mountains, and some things just don't add up.
Yeah, and I like my background is in like the engineering of that kind of stuff.
Of course, yeah.
Like
but no, it's super interesting, man.
Yeah, but there are like a lot of assumptions that we make about ancient civilizations on Earth that are a product of the propaganda of colonialism. Like it was, like people were taught that it's savages, and you're introducing culture, and you're introducing that kind of stuff. And we know now that, I mean, there was like the mounds outside of St. Louis and stuff like that. Even when I was growing up, we were taught that like all the Native Americans in that part of the country were, roaming all the time and following herds and all that kind of stuff. But there was a civilization there, and there's evidence of a city that was probably larger than London or Paris at the time. It's, and got wiped out by a plague brought by the colonists. And that kind of thing. And so, and there's, where I grew up in Iowa, is close to the Minnesota border, and there's, the pipestone there where the, like the different ceremonial pipes were made and stuff, and they found, those pipes in Mexico and places. So there were these complex trade routes that covered,
of course,
the whole continent, and all of that was washed away, and it's just like people are finally kind of talking about it and stuff.
No, definitely.
The Native Americans that are alive now and know that, like they know that history themselves, but
they're just ignored, man. And it's
ignored.
It's not just an American thing. It's easy to tar that, as a guy living in Scotland, American, but Americans were just Europeans, like white Americans or European ancestry. And we've done the same, in Australia with the Aboriginal people there. And I wouldn't claim to be an expert on it, but certainly listening to people who definitely are more clued up in it. If you look at like the death numbers of like female Indigenous people in Canada and stuff, and it's just swept under the carpet because no one cares if they're murdered. And in Australia and in North America, they put them to reservations where there is nothing to do, but then they'll open up, bars and things like that, and then they call them drunks and stuff, but they're depressed. We're getting a taste of that in lockdown, even though we are in a city. If you're only in your own little place and you can't go and be with people and you can't practice your culture and your community, which is so ingrained in you because they're closer to their kind of early past than we are, because we're all in this like metropolis,
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have this natural depression in you. And that's where addiction stems from, doesn't it? It's like a longing for something that you're kind of trying to dull with chemicals, And
that's by design. I mean, like, that's
100%.
Reservations in the U.S. where, like, if you're growing up on a reservation now and, like, you're trying to get ahead, you're trying to get educated and that kind of stuff, there's still, the jobs aren't there on the reservation. Like, if you want to go into technology, you have to leave and go to, states thousands of miles, or miles and miles away, and remove yourself from your culture and that sort of thing. So it's you're stuck between, trying to live who you are and help your culture and keep that alive, or abandon them and join this other society that's wasn't there in the first place. It's like that book, America Before, aside from all the theoreticals in there, does also, again, like, this is common knowledge. You can Google it.
but it's just not spoke about, that, the Spanish conquistadors actively were told, once they had given knowledge of what they saw, were told to absolutely, like, keep that under wraps. So there's written accounts, from one of Cortez's scribes, and they went over, and they're sailing through the Amazon. And I don't know it word for word, but when I was listening to it, I was like, wow. And he's like, we got through this snake of a river, and then we got to a city, that rivaled the great marble halls of Sevilla and spiraled far larger than, Palma and Mallorca. And, it was cities. It wasn't just
Yeah.
like a Mayan temple or an Aztec temple, excuse my ignorance of which part that was. It wasn't just the temple and then like shanty huts. Like, they're talking cities. He's talking like, beautiful stone places, like people wearing beautiful clothing and stuff like that. It's not just like Indians, I know is a derogatory term, but that's the other words they would then use instead. Like, of course there was some like that, but you've got that everywhere, for all the, if you look maybe even Jacobean times, you've got Highlanders up in the fields. You have them now, people living out wild, but then you've got the people in castles and the gentry and stuff. You have different types of people. So
Yep.
their story was, let's paint it all that it's the lower class, like, when absolutely it wasn't. I can't remember the actual name for it, but they've now figured out as well that the soil in the Amazon has been, like, genetically, like, modified over thousands and thousands of years, so that it was like the best soil to grow all these crops and food and stuff. So the Amazon, the Amazon is, like, obviously got in the whole world, it's got the most diverse number of different plants and stuff. And I think about 80% of them have been engineered to provide, like, food giving plants and stuff like that. They weren't natural to that place, like whoever these people were.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen overnight.
Like corn that we eat, that maize that came from Native American cultures was like, that was genetically engineered in the sense of it was
Exactly
that way. They knew what they were doing. And that domestic, kind of agriculture had, we don't even know when that started in North America or South America and Americas,
Yeah, no, they had abundance, and they now think that how overgrown it is, and the channels of river and all the food that they made from that jungle, it wasn't like that at all. It was like quite an open landscape. I don't know if it's tens of thousands, hundred. I would need to look at the book again, but that this was just like a river system with some marshland, and they overgrew it and made all the food so they didn't need to leave it, and fish from the river and brought in deer and stuff, so that they were basically had this great civilization protected by jungle that nobody could get into. It's civilization and ingenuity to, like, degrees we couldn't fathom now, and that certainly is lost knowledge. And to just write that off as like savages who had slaves build temples for some reason, it's just so easy to just fob off.
It could also probably, like, a lot of that sort of, like, in North America, a lot of the Native Americans were painted with this kind of warlike brush too, where there were these tribes always fighting, and which wasn't true at all. There was, and there's much more of a, even now, like, I have some colleagues and stuff, and, like, there's much more of a collective cultural idea there, and that idea that, like, you're curators of the land, and like, it kind of all belongs to everybody, and like this kind of capitalistic approach that colonization brought in destroyed a lot of that. I think a lot of, like, the things that we can't imagine them being able to accomplish and stuff, they accomplished because they were working together to do it as a society.
100%.
Not done if everybody's on board.
I was going to talk about another book later on with you when I talk about your outdoorsy stuff, and I'll hit on it more there. But there's a book by a guy called Dr. Christopher Ryan. He's like an anthropologist, but he wrote this one called Civilized to Death. I talk about it a lot because it's just a pretty great listen. I listen to it rather than read. But yeah, he's just basically talking about why there are these pandemics of depression, and basically we're not living in our natural environment. And there's a statistic by a lot of the early, I'm not talking now conquistadors and stuff, talking more like American, guns kind of era when they were taking over the Indian land and stuff like that. And whenever an Native American was kind of brought in there, and they tried to, like, obviously later on they were successful with it, and they brought in schools to do it and stuff. But early settlements, when they tried to bring in a native and almost whitewash to their way of life, then even if it had been years and years and years, and they were given clothes and food and civilization, they would always try and escape, even if it meant like death. But whenever, I wouldn't say whenever, but like massive amount of accounts in favor of this. Whenever a white person was like taken captive, or they stole a baby, because apparently the natives would do that, to keep their lineage going as they were starting to dwindle, they would take children and that, but not to kill them and stuff, to like literally like raise them. Like the white people never wanted to leave. Didn't matter when they were taken. Like after living in their society for a while, living off the land, living in community, like only taking what they needed. And there was this real breakdown. It was the white people had kind of tarred it with uncivilized, but what the natives were saying was like, we can be as civilized as we want, but this is the point we've reached where it's really happy. We're camping, we're eating what we need, we're living in the sunshine, we're not having to do 8 hours of work just to then relax, because there's this misunderstanding about hunter-gatherers. So Chris Ryan talks about this, and he uses a lot of evidence and stuff. It's 35 was old, that was the age you died. It was like, no, it was just statistically a lot, without the modern medicines, a lot of babies died. That brings your average age. If you got an illness young, you would maybe die. But he's like, 35 has never been old. You've got 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds in those communities too. But they didn't need to work and hunt and gather all day. They said and it was also something they enjoyed. That's why we've got sport now. That's why we get endorphins from sport. It's like they would go out in a group, go and get what they needed, and then come back and essentially have a big party. It was like, Christmas for them all the time. They're with family, a big meal. They've all been out on the hunt together. You know what I mean? It's like, they were like, why the hell, you guys are civilized. Why would we want to go down that route? We're where we need to be.
No, I'm sure that's idealizing it a bit too, but like, there's a book called, what is it? Like The People's History of the United States of America. I forget the exact name, but the premise is it's sort of history told from the perspective of the minority, and it's very, like, I think a professor from Berkeley, but like very well researched, very well, and everything. And it does have documentation of that where, I mean, it has the original sort of diary entries from Columbus and stuff when he landed, and they're terrifying. Like his, we've landed, there's these people on this island, and they're very friendly, they're very trusting, we haven't found any gold, but we can sell them back home as slaves very easily. They're very easy to catch. Like they're not even, like just horrible stuff. And then,
read that, yeah.
Yeah, and then like writings from, ministers and stuff for the church that landed, that also there's that perspective of like, this is all in the name of God, Yep. But then there were ones that left and went to live with the Native American communities and wrote, and some of their writing survived, of just how, better the society was, and how well organized, and how compassionate, and how like the difference of like being in a society where everybody was trying to make life better for everybody,
For sure, and that's not just focused in on American natives. You've got that saying Ubuntu from the Zulu people. It's like, unless you have, I don't have, essentially, or like how can I be happy if you're not happy? Mm-hmm. And that is so, and like you said, dark things at work. It doesn't need to be a conspiracy theorist to realize why that's not good for the economy. Because why do you need to buy a new TV and a new car and go on holiday and do all that if we're just happy by like being outside and making sure each other are cool, Yeah. So we're so far removed from that philosophy. I do think it's kind of slowly changing. I think there's a lot of like grassroots things happening, certainly more than I've ever seen, with little charities and organizations. Obviously, you support kind of one we're setting up here, and In time, we'll get people much more together. It's just kind of, we've started this at a time when we can't really be physically together, you know. But yeah, I think, you know, we're so far away from what I really see as civilization, which is people, you know, rather than like products and companies and things like that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that
another, sorry, then you go.
I think that's true in a lot of areas. Like, you know, I'm in science now, and you know, there's been so much more of a push of recognizing kind of the systemic problems that we have in education and science and stuff. And you know, in science, people like a lot of people go into science thinking that, oh, it's about merit. It's about, you know, you do the science, you get the facts. The facts speak for themselves. Like, your career is based on how well you do the work. And like, in an ideal world, maybe, but we don't live in, you know, we live in a society that's full of all kinds of other stuff. And recognizing now that, like, there are people that don't have the opportunity, they don't have the access to the education. Like, the whole system is biased toward, you know, certain backgrounds and certain people and that sort of thing. And I think there's been, I mean, especially with like the change of administration in the U.S. and stuff, there's like, that's all moving forward. People are getting better about it, and the people are honestly trying to make changes and rebuild the system into something better.
Let's talk about that then, because obviously from an outsider, I really, really, I mean, you know me, man. Like, I've been lucky enough with my band and stuff like that to meet people from all over the world, and just living in Glasgow. Like, it's a really, like, people come here and they seem to stay here because it's nice and friendly, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of tourists as well. So they're not staying, they're passing through. So lucky enough to have met people from all over the world, and I'm just so interested in like history and culture and like, you know, what, like, it's not what we are all the same, but I don't think you know, that we should shy away from celebrating differences as well. Like, I want to know, like, what is somebody's like holiday season in Colombia like, and what's it like growing up as a Spanish person? You know, I like knowing all that kind of stuff. So I definitely want to put that disclaimer down there that I'm not just like wailing on America here, because I've only ever met awesome American people. So I don't believe this narrative that, you know, like what you see on like with MAGA hats and like stuff. Like, we've all got ignorant people, man. Glasgow is exactly the same. I believe there's much more good people than there are ignorant people, and even those people are just maybe misinformed for whatever reason, you know. Which is obviously my biased view. They would probably say I'm misinformed, so that's fair. But yeah, obviously, looking from afar, it looks so obvious sometimes. America, like, why are you allowing guns when there's consistent like shootings and stuff? And why is it? Why is it that you think there is? You live. Why is it you think that the rest of the world, like, you know? Oh, I even listen to podcasts from really smart people, and I'm on their side, and then I'll hear them say something like, "But I mean, we don't want to be a socialist country like those damn, like, you know, like Scandinavia and stuff." You're like, what? Like, you guys, you know, when Trump was in control and stuff, and it's like, you know, you guys seem a little bit brainwashed. And then if you'd seen this thing that happened in the White House, I don't mean you guys like you, I mean people that like speak like that. That White House thing, literally, any other country, that got
Honestly,
seen as a
yeah.
bit of, yeah, it got seen as a bit of a joke, like with the buffalo hat guy and that. You imagine that had happened, like stormed, like, I'm not for the royals of that, but stormed Buckingham Palace or Westminster, so like heads would have rolled, like it would have been army would have been in there, like it would have been crazy. I mean, what is this like dissonance in the States?
And I mean, the sad thing that the National Guard was there when it was the Black Lives Matter marches.
Exactly, man. Like, fucking hell, like people were getting shot for like, and yeah, there was some looters, man. Of course, like, you're never gonna have a fully peaceful, like, with that many people. People are outraged, you know. Some people are taking advantage of it, of course, but like, you know, it's like everything. But like, still, people are getting shot for that, and then you've got people running in, literally saying they're gonna like lynch like members of the White House, like even just being in there, like the documents that are in there, like that can't
Yeah.
happen. Yet no one was even like shot with a rubber bullet.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Like, that's a tough question for you. I know it's
It's
not for
not,
you to answer, but like, what is
that's
it?
something
Because
I don't
obviously,
understand. Like,
yeah,
because it all seems pretty obvious to me too. But and you know, I do like people need to be held accountable for that. I mean, that was just insane. And you're right. Like, I mean, you'd like to think that if it happened here, it'd be different, but you don't know, Like that was one
Yeah.
of the things that I think I never thought it could happen at the Capitol building. Like nobody's gonna actually storm the Capitol and smash windows and that kind of stuff. And yeah,
I just think the throughout the Black Lives Matter and the anti kind of mask wearing stuff and that, like just seeing the sheer brashness of, again, it's not digging on Americans, but this is where you see it. A country so progressive in loads of ways as America, but having people stand there with fully automatic rifles, just saying, I won't wear a mask. What are you going to do? You want to come at me? I'll just fire like 100 bullets in you. It's frightening.
yeah,
It was at that, I don't know if it's changed now because of the new president, but it was kind of that bubbling point where like, it only takes a little thing for this to go from really bad to fucking terrible.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean, I get, America's got a big hunting history and stuff like that, but like these laws were written like hundreds of years ago when it took like, have you ever seen the YouTube thing? It's like they wrote this to protect your home, and it's like he's reading out the amendment. He's like, shot, and then he's like, pipe, clean, new gunpowder. Like it takes like 10 minutes to get the second rifle. He's like, now it's like, yeah, I can defend my home. Brrr. It's like, so I don't
yeah.
know. Do you think that'll ever change? Basically, is what I'm saying.
I don't know. I would have hoped it would have changed by now, but thinking going backwards, there was a period where there were kind of tighter gun control laws and that kind of stuff, but I don't know. We'll see. I hope so. I really hope so. It's nuts right now. And
Just again, yeah. Sorry, on you go, man.
well, it's also like that's also capitalism too, because like you look at that whenever there's like a school shooting or something, like gun sales go up, like the paranoia goes up, and everybody buys a gun to protect themselves, and it's like, how do you break that cycle?
Yeah, talking about those podcast people that I really respect, and then they go like, oh, but those Scandinavians and stuff like that, the brainwash. It's like, they talk about it and they're like, yeah, it's awful, it's absolutely awful. But I mean, if that teacher had a gun, like, no,
And there'd be more dead people.
no, that's not the thing. Then what if the teacher has a mental breakdown? Because undoubtedly we're dealing with people with mental issues, but like if they've got a mental issue and a knife, like that can happen all over the world, yeah, it's a tragedy if a couple of people die, but then they can be apprehended. If they even, I read about the guys from Columbine, because that's all coming out with the Freedom of Information Act now. And it was like they actually, as awful as it is to say this, I believe it was Columbine. Anyway, they actually only shot for like, the first 10 minutes, and then like really didn't, obviously were like the start reality of what was happening, and then they kind of let people kind of get away and then like shot themselves in that. But the damage is done in that first outbreak because it's such a powerful rapid weapon. So there's no time for.
I think you hit on a bit of it there. That part of the problem in the U.S. comes down to basically the educational system and the healthcare. Like there is very little support for mental health, and treatment and care in the U.S. Like it's, especially if you have no money or you're not, wealthy. Like the idea of going to, first there's the stigma of going to talk to a psychologist or admitting that your kid needs to talk to somebody or that kind of thing. But then there's also just the cost is phenomenal there. Like and you're not gonna, the real way to stop that from happening is to recognize those kids that need help early,
Yeah.
and help them, and those people that need help.
Yeah, man. I mean, obviously, like that's not to focus in on that shit. Like, I think America looks an awesome place to live in terms of like, I think they do the sports thing really great. Like they get like the whole community around the school. You've got your band kind of players. You've got like the people that do all the support. Like the communities get so together. Like I would love to see that in Scotland. Our big city football team, if it's not the Old Firm, gets maybe 2,000 fans. Like, a college in America would fill a 20,000 seater stadium. So
yeah, that's true.
There's obviously so much great community and great stuff there. I think if they could just nail that gun thing, like a lot of the fear and a lot of this kind of brandishing like would just disappear, But I hope so. Do you think things will change with Biden and the new kind of?
I think certain things will change. I mean, there is a real problem of that, like, kind of fear mongering in all aspects of life, and the fact that that generates money for a lot of people. Like, there's a lot of people that rely on that fear, and that even on social media and stuff, like all the conflict and the infighting and all that kind of stuff that happens when you scroll through Instagram, or Facebook, like, that's making money for people,
Yeah.
And it's I don't know how it's addicting, and I don't know how you reverse that,
100%. I had to really make a mental challenge and I'm not perfect. I'll still jump into it now and again, but I used to argue with so many people who are like, that is a ridiculous opinion. Again, being open to the fact maybe they'd think mine was as well, of course, but just like, I have to stop myself now because it's just wasted time. And they've done studies on the algorithms, and they populate your feed with what you're spending most time typing. So literally, they're sending you shit that's going to outrage you.
Yeah.
So you got to break that.
No, it's tough. I think like with that sort of thing, younger and younger people are better at it. Like, I think, I think, like, actually the kids growing up now are getting more and more aware of that and what that means, and like not quite taking things online as seriously, I hope,
I think you're right, man. It's more like memes, and like they seem a little bit too cool for school, where it's like older people than us and our age just going, this is an outrage. Like, yeah, man, for sure. Let's get on to kind of better things. Like, you see in your Instagram and Facebook and stuff, like, you're always, when you're not working, you're always just out in the hills, out in the wilderness. Is that, there's a great thing. Like, is that kind of part of your upbringing in America, do you think?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I grew up in a pretty, like, small town in Iowa. Like, it's classified as a city in Iowa, but Iowa doesn't have a lot of big population centers. But yeah, I mean, like, my group of friends on the weekends, we spent camping and like just wandering off. I had a ladder hid outside my bedroom window at night. I'd sneak out and just wander around in
nice
woods and stuff, and climb back in my window later. I'm an insomniac, so it was something to do at night.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I live in Glasgow. Like, my work is not really based here, and there's like one research group at Glasgow Uni that we work with and stuff. But I was in London for 10 years and finally kind of had the chance where I could just be wherever I wanted. And like, what I love about Glasgow is the people and the friendliness that you mentioned, but also just the access to the Highlands and all that kind of stuff too. So,
no, that's awesome, man. I think, like, I grew up in Perth, so again, it's classed as a city, but it's so small. But we're not the Highlands, but like literally 20 minutes on the road, you're in Dunkeld, and that is the start of the Highlands. So they call it like the gateway to the Highlands. So I've spent a lot of my youth camping and being outdoorsy, more than even guys that I meet in Glasgow. Like, they're like, what? Like, you like camping and stuff. However, Scotland, I think, it's really, unless it's in the summer, it's the hardcore that go camping because the weather's really poor sometimes.
Yeah.
Most of the time. But I get the feeling from like guys like yourself, and like seeing how like Americans like do it a lot, because like the hunting background or going big camping trips, it's kind of like you've got that ingrained into you, so it doesn't really matter the weather. Like, I've seen some of your posts and it's like a shitty weekend, but it doesn't matter, you're going up camping,
Yeah, no, that's probably true. Like, I know a lot of people I grew up with were like that, and they're not necessarily like, they don't. There's even people that I grew up camping with and stuff that don't consider themselves, or didn't consider themselves outdoorsy,
Mm-hmm.
And at least where I grew up in the States, that was very much a part of, and I grew up, like, I guess I was kind of an agricultural, like, history and that sort of stuff. So you've got farmers and the people that are just kind of used to working on the land and stuff. So,
do you think, kind of touching on the earlier points we made, do you think there's something, I certainly feel it, just the space literally can empty me from anxiety, but do you think there's something there, like deep rooted within us. It's like when you're out there looking at a fire, like living as close to the kind of outdoors as you can. Do you think that's a natural kind of remedy for the anxieties and the stresses of kind of everyday?
For me, for sure. You know,
Yeah.
like in the end, you know, I have convinced some people that, you know, like friends who were convinced that they didn't like camping and that kind of stuff, to go out and actually do stuff, and they always enjoy it. And like, and yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, for me, that is definitely my stress relief. I think you hit it
Yeah.
there.
I think there should be kind of more to, I don't know how you would do this, but I think there'd be a lot less issues with young people, in the streets and stuff like that, if like governments or councils or stuff did more, like, actually had organizations within them to take young people out, even once a quarter, just for a
Yeah.
weekend or something like that, and just got them doing some stuff. It doesn't need to be like survival stuff, just like, this is what it's like outside your city, and you can just jump on this train and you can be there and just put up a tent and just take some, you just take some beans, you don't need to have like
Like, did you have
extravagant
any of
packs.
that when you were growing up in school and stuff? Did you have classes and wilderness stuff?
Nah,
Or
not at all, man.
yeah, see, like we're like in the town that I grew up in, like we had an outdoor classroom for the grade school, and we did orienteering, and we did, you know, there were days where we went out to the state park, and I remember like once in middle school of like we spent a whole weekend kind of camping and stuff, and like everybody in the class, you know.
That's cool, man. No, that would be good. My
Yeah.
my my experience was just, my uncle was in the army, so he would take us to this wee island in the Tay, Moncrief Island, and he would just put up like tarpaulin between two trees and just put us in a black bag each, and he was like, "This will keep you warm," We're like, "Oh, man." And then just like getting a wee bit older and just like going with my friends, like we'd go to like the local like River Amond, like through some forest, and you just cycle on your bike and you just have a couple of tents, and it just feels great. I think it's the first experience you get of like, independence, really, because you're like in your own kind of home, like it's like Lord of the Flies hopefully doesn't happen, but yeah, you're only 20 minutes out, but no, I think obviously that's great if they do that in the schools there. They certainly could do that. Like my wife works at the arts charity just kind of behind our street, and works with a lot of kids from backgrounds which are challenging, and could be a barrier later in life if they didn't have people kind of helping them with different things. And it's arts they help them with, so it's giving them opportunities for things that their backgrounds might just be forced to go into, like a 9 to 5 job to pay bills. This is showing them they could do something different. They could enjoy what they do. And yeah, I think if there was more money put into kind of outdoorsy things as well, then that would be great. Just literally for the things we're talking about, aggression, like depression, anxiety, isolation, just letting you're a bigger part of something as well. I think nature has a great way to do it. Even just going to walk sometimes, and you're internalizing a lot of stuff. It could be nothing, but you're just internalizing stuff sometimes, and then you literally can just look out at trees and like a mountainscape and go, well, that's been there for how many like millions of years, and look how big all this is, and like all my problems aren't even in just my body, it's all this wee thing in here, and you're like, right, fucking hell, it's important, but it's not worth like focusing all your attention on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good wee lesson for people. I was noticing as well, obviously, when you go camping and stuff, a lot you take your wee acoustic and stuff. You were telling me you had your earliest. I love your songwriting and stuff, by the way. I think it's quite early Bon Iver, like recorded in the cabin kind of vibe. But you were saying your early background was in music, yeah?
Some of it, yeah. Like my dad was a musician growing up, and had a band. So when I was a kid, he had instruments all over the basement. So, and I learned piano kind of early on from my aunt, and I grew up playing and stuff. And then I was in like a garage band, sort of like I don't know, grunge punk. We were also sort of the rhythm section for the school jazz band, so there was a bit of jazz in there,
Nice.
and stuff. And like that was when I was maybe like 14 or so, and Like we recorded one album in in Iowa and stuff, which was
Is it online anywhere?
It's no, that was before like before we even thought about putting it online. But I think I have some like actual CDs around somewhere. Maybe at least back in Iowa. But
Need to get that on Spotify, man. It's easy done.
I mean, it's very like angst-ridden teenage,
That's
late
the best
90s
kind.
sort of.
That's the best kind, man. Yeah, that was, you said you went to school. That was like your first degree, is that right?
First degree was theater, so I did theater and performance studies.
Nice.
And my mother's a visual artist. She's a painter, so I also grew up a lot with that, and so tied in, and I kind of specialized in playwriting. But I did theater and performance studies, and then at the same time did molecular environmental biology. So I was always kind of like on a art and science track, I guess.
Well, I guess you were showing me some stuff before on the actual NASA website. Like you do some visual art, like some kind of comic strips for them as well, don't you?
Yeah, I do like, well, it's a graphic history. Yeah, so like for like these kind of books.
Awesome.
So there's like I don't know, look at the
yeah, that's
like,
cool, man.
Basically a comic book, but it's all like an actual sort of history of astrobiology and the science that we fund, and like actual researchers and stuff in the book that are talking about the science and stuff. But
so you're just kind of animating the lectures almost.
Sort of. I mean, it's interesting because like I love comics and I grew up with comics and drawing comics and stuff, and I'm also kind of self-taught in that sense. I mean, like I guess I said my mom's a visual artist, so I learned a lot from her, and I did take some art classes and stuff as well, growing up and at the University of Iowa. But it's like we were looking at it as sort of like an educational thing, and comics are like comic art is so perfect for teaching science in a sense because you have the words and you have the visuals, and it helps capture things because people learn, there's some people that can like read a textbook and it's like, they get it. Like, but there's other people who are visual learners who have to like see pieces together and can need to visualize that in their mind, So in that sense, you're telling that story from both angles, and it's become a really, really cool tool for actually teaching some of the science, which is great.
Now, that's really cool, and I think an organization, as renowned and well known as NASA, it's really cool that they kind of put time into that. I mean, is that part of like, will they give you time to go and do the comics for the site, or do you have to? Yeah,
but it is that. Like the initial one was, we did the first one for the 50th anniversary of exobiology at NASA. So exobiology is kind of what, like, astrobiology is a thing that kind of came later as a program, but exobiology was first. Exobiology is a little more specific in the science than astrobiology. Astrobiology is broader, but when the 50th anniversary of exobiology kind of came up, we decided to do it as like a special, celebration of how, and the first issue is like the origin of astrobiology as a program, and so it talks about, how NASA started, and well, it goes back to, early civilization and ideas of life beyond Earth and that kind of stuff, and how that has always been a question since the beginning of civilization, really, and also the beginning of NASA. That was like one of the fundamental questions of why NASA exists is, what's out there, and like it was really successful. So they just decided to we should just keep going with it and keep telling the story. And yeah, it's like now it's become kind of a regular thing that there's a big astrobiology conference every 2 years, and like the idea is to kind of have the next issue ready for that conference when it comes around. And we've kind of focused each issue on something more specific. Like the most recent one is all on prebiotic chemistry and the origin of life. So all the research that happens in that area in astrobiology. Whereas like there's an issue on extrasolar planets and planets around other stars. There's issues on Mars and all that kind of stuff. So
awesome, man. Where could people can people read that online? Can they look at the comics?
It's on the astrobiology website, which is just astrobiology.nasa.gov. And there's like on the top bar, there's a resources link, and the graphic histories is under there. And they're all available in PDF and stuff. And then, like, we have hard copies, but all the bases are closed right now because of COVID. So we're not printing anything right now. Like, all the printing facilities are closed. So, but normally, like, when people email us, we'll send hard copies and stuff. And
amazing. Well,
yeah,
I'll stick on the kind of show notes of this. I'll stick the wee link for people to check out if you're listening and you'd like to see the comic that Aaron's done. Yeah, you showed me some in the bar one night. Looks cool, man. Yeah, I'd spend a good while looking at that. I kind of forgot about that, so that's cool. I'll go and check some of those.
It's fun. It's fun stuff, and I should actually talk to your wife too about like the organization she's with the arts and
100%. It's called Impact Arts.
Yeah. Like the point of it is also getting science out to broader audiences and stuff too, because you have like we've done some work with some art museums and that sort of thing, but the idea is like for classes they're doing or whatever, like it's a way of like looking at art, but some people are interested in the science of it, some people are just interested in the artwork, and so like but if they read through it and stuff
100% as well, like they're having to do a lot just now, well, most of it obviously online. They've got their base there, and they usually had kids coming in and doing different kind of programs. It could be anything from like textiles to like painting to filmmaking to music making. So there was like some science and comic and stuff like that. No, for sure, I'll link the two years up. That'd be cool. Getting to what I don't want to embarrass myself by such a ridiculous question here, but like, do you get like kind of heads up on big breakthroughs and stuff before like the general public, or is that only like kind of top kind of behind the scenes level? For example, Mars, if they find shit, do you get a wee information first?
I guess it depends on who finds it. I mean, I'll get advanced sort of notice, or like researchers that we fund, if they've got a big paper coming out, a lot of the times they'll send me, before it goes in, it's published in the journal, they'll send me like the copy and say, okay, this is coming out, like this might be something we want a press release about, or we want, can you help us organize, talks to give, or like, that kind of thing. But like NASA is public domain, and that's kind of one misconception of NASA, is that it's funded by public money, so NASA has a responsibility to report everything to the public. So like nothing way in advance,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was like the Mars, like in the 90s that I mentioned, the Mars meteorite, where they thought that they found evidence of life and stuff, and that was like they held that announcement off because the president wanted to make it, like Clinton wanted to stand up and say, this is what we've done. So
he was definitely a showman of a president, wasn't he?
Yeah. And there wasn't like it wasn't, and it was also like they wanted to, plan, when information was like released to the New York Times, and like get it all kind of organized as a press package before they put it out. But it wasn't like they hid it for years or anything like that. It was just, it was weeks or whatever before the actual journal article hit. So.
This there's the new, well, it's not the new lander, but it's going to kind of like new places now, isn't it? Like I've been seeing some of the updates.
Yeah, so the Perseverance, it's Mars 2020 is the mission, and it lands on the 18th of February, I think. I should know that off the top of my head, because that's like what I'm working on right now, is a bunch of kind of events based around the landing and stuff, and like I'm taking some of the artwork from the Mars issue and turning it into coloring pages that we're gonna,
Sweet
stuff for kids to color and that kind of stuff. And but yeah, so it's a rover that's very similar to the Curiosity rover, which was the last one that NASA sent to Mars, but it's landing in a different place. It's landing in a place called Jezero Crater, and like the big thing for us in astrobiology is that it's the first rover that's really an astrobiology mission, because what it's doing is it's landing in this place where like all evidence indicates that it used to be filled with water, like there used to be a sea there. And there's kind of these deposits along what used to be the beaches, where you've got like carbonates, like this certain type of rock that was deposited. But you get on Earth where like, stuff in the water settles out on the bottom, and then that gets compacted and turned into rocks. But the way that this rock is formed traps life. Like if there was life on Mars when this was happening, like there would probably be evidence left in those rocks that it was there. And so this rover is going to go and drive around and kind of pick up pieces, like samples, and then pack them in these tubes. And I'll drive all around and collect all these tubes, and then like put those together as a cache and set them down. And then the next mission is a Mars sample return that will go and land and pick them up and then like launch them back to Earth.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Like the technology that goes into that stuff.
Crazy. Like there's so many, like it's really amazing, like the engineering behind it. But
so someone's job is literally to be looking on a screen and driving that thing and like using the wee drill to get the sample, or does it do it all like,
I mean,
is it mapped out and just does it automatically?
They've gotten a lot better with like the self-driving and the autonomy of the rover being able to kind of like, take a picture and say, okay, now this is probably an interesting place, and that kind of stuff. But you do have like somebody on the ground making those final decisions, like a whole team of people making those final decisions about, okay, this is where we want to drill, and this looks really interesting, and because you only have a limited number of these sample canisters as well. So,
yeah. What's your take? Do you think they'll find life? I know it's a huge question. I'm not like asking you in terms of a professional opinion or,
yeah. I mean, like theoretically all the ingredients were there,
Yeah.
I hope so. Like, I mean, it'll be cool either way. It'll be, but it would be awesome. It would be awesome to find something that, we could say, yeah, like this was definitely life. Because it would also help us, like part of the problem is like defining what life is to begin with. It's hard. Like we don't even know that on Earth. Like at what point does chemistry become life? Like, but if we could find something that we could definitively say is life, and it'd be awesome if it was completely different than what's here.
That's it. Like it doesn't all need to be, when they talk about, for want of a better word, alien life out there and stuff like that, like it may well be we're the only thing in the whole entire galaxy and stuff in the universe that is like us. But that doesn't mean it's the only life form. Like, and it doesn't even mean the other ones are primordial versions, because, like, we can only see certain frequencies and hear certain frequencies. I don't know how like read up you are on kind of like psychedelics and stuff, but it's a lot of the chat about that. It's like radio isn't false. It's not any less music you hear just because you can't see it. There's a receiver and you tune into a different frequency that without that receiver you couldn't hear it. Then you have this, one of the oldest kind of forms of life in the world is, fungi. And then it's like for tens of thousands of years, ancients, like talking about ancient America and stuff as well, ayahuasca and, just mushrooms, basically, DMT, things like that are all natural things. Like they're not any less technology just because we didn't make them with plastic and stuff. Surely they're more technology because they've evolved and stuff, and people then say they get visuals and can have different kind of visions and messages and stuff. So there could be stuff out there that we just don't register, but it's just every bit as advanced in different ways.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like we get that question a lot of like, why are you looking for life that looks like Earth life? Like there could be all kinds of other options and stuff that's similar, like the whole idea of silicon-based life and that sort of thing rather than carbon. But like, I mean, part of the problem is that, like I said, NASA's publicly funded, so you have to start somewhere. You have to like, you can't just. I mean, we did that with SETI initially, listening for radio signals and that kind of stuff, where you're just sort of like looking and hoping. But we're you have to try to kind of start with what and work from there, which is tough. But but there are people that are looking at sort of defining life in a much broader sense than like biology. You've got like there's some ideas of complexity, like looking at like there's certain chemicals that we see on Earth that can only be manufactured. Like we only make them. Like there's a certain like biology, like whether it's fungi or whatever. Like there's certain things that like you get to a certain level of chemical complexity that you have to have a system to make that. Mm-hmm. It's not something that just forms in the ether, So kind of defining like a complexity limit of life and looking for like complex systems out there that might be some sort of indication that there is something behind it. But yeah, it gets very complicated in that sense. And
despite my own bias for like the incredible and like the super interesting and stuff, which all of it obviously is, but like in terms of ancient civilizations and people have been here, or we've the aliens, for want of a better word, could just we are them and they'd come from another place and that. But despite all that, in whatever sense life is, there's just got to be, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm not learned at all on the subject, but like just when you hear that every universe, there's all these different like multiplications of them and stuff, it would just be ridiculously incredible if we were the only one out here.
Yeah. I forget who said it, but it'd be an incredible waste of space.
Yeah. And just like, what would the odds be? Like if we literally have been just seeded from the chemistry of the universe and just multiplied over millions of years to where we are now, like why wouldn't that just have happened loads of places?
Yeah. And also, like, I mean, our perspective is so limited. We're limited by our size, we're limited by our position, and all that kind of stuff. Like there was a time when we thought that planets were probably rare, and most suns wouldn't have planets, or most stars wouldn't have planets and that stuff. And then once we kind of built telescopes powerful enough to see them, or to see the effects of them on their stars and stuff, like now we know that there's tons of planets out there, and like we still haven't found a planet exactly like Earth, but we also don't have the technology yet to spot one because they're too close to their star, and a lot of the techniques that you're using to find planets around other stars, are basically at the planet moves in front of, like it blocks some of the light, so you're watching the light of the star and then you see it dim a bit and then brighten again, and so that a planet came in front of it. But like Earth happened 1 year if you're just looking at our sun from. Are you still there? Looks like you kind of froze.
Yeah. You were breaking up for me as well.
Yeah. Okay.
But like there's ways to tell that there are things coming over there.
But to see something like Earth, you'd have to watch a star for multiple years because it only crosses in front once a year.
Yeah.
And also, the Earth is tiny compared to the star, so we don't have a telescope that's like to spot that difference. So far, is still beyond our capability, unless it's just in a perfect position. And that's the other thing. You have to be looking at the star in the perfect position that the planet actually goes in front of it, and it's not, from our perspective, goes above, so like we already know that there's tons of planets. We haven't spotted one just like Earth, but it's very, very likely that we just don't have the technology to spot one yet,
100%. And there's also, like, again, super layman terms, but when I've seen a lot of people theorize, when we look at like bacteria and like how rapidly that like multiplies and stuff like that, and if you zoomed in on that, you can see like life, and even things like, I can't remember what they call it, like water bears or stuff, but it just looks like, it looks like just nothing, like we would never see it, and then zoom, and it literally it like resembles like a mammal. It's got teeth and legs, and you think like, we could literally, if we can look at life like that, what's to say that we aren't just a version of that to something that's way bigger than us. And if you want to talk about a god or a higher being, like literally just things could just be multiply. I think I struggle to get that in my head and theorize that, because I look at things like a candle with a label on it, and you think, well, how could a bacteria make a product with a factory that makes a label and all this? But that's only my reckoning of what life is. How do we know that that can be on lower scales, minuscule scales, and it doesn't make it any less real?
Yeah, but that does touch on what I was saying about the complexity. Like the chances of getting the chemicals arranged in such a way that you have a label on, that thing. Like there's some scientists that, like, if you went to Mars and you saw a hammer, like there's a hammer laying on the ground there, that didn't just appear naturally. Like there's that level of complexity where you can identify life with. But there's also the time component too. Like you think about, like, we're basing all of this on our lifespan, and like our view of existence around us is based on that sort of time span. Like we look at a tree and it's static. Like that could be, like if we didn't know it was alive and we were viewing it from a distance, it could just be a thing there. But like on a different time scale, if you're looking at a tree over 100 years, like they're chaotic and causing all kinds of, like, they're ripping things apart and they're destroying buildings, and they're they're like on a different time frame, they're super active.
Exactly. I was just thinking that too. Like, time's relative to us. Like a gnat is like born and then dies in the same day. 12 hours, I think, is its lifespan, but like it reaches maturity and everything like that. Dogs, obviously 12 years, like us, maybe 80, like a giant tortoise, like 100, but we're all just things on this atmosphere. But like how long we've been here compared to, like, the dinosaurs is, like, I think they say, like, dinosaurs, if it was 30 years, humans have been half a day, for example. It's like time is only relative because we're living this, so like the evolution, if you look at like Earth from afar, for example, like the way the winter season and then the summer comes in, it's just like a breath, like the trees go and it's like lungs. It expands and then it contracts, and everything could just be part of a much bigger thing. And I think sometimes people just think that means you're talking about God and stuff like that, but these could just be analogies that people who knew something or whatever were trying to, like, explain to people who just could not understand. Like, obviously there's so much we'll just never know, but it really is fascinating, even without the kind of scientific background, isn't it, if you just open your mind up to it a little bit. Amazing. Well, man, I've chewed your ear off, so we've got some books to share, though. We'll do that offline. Definitely share some of that stuff, man. I've been asking every guest this. I saw a wee quote through lockdown that just said, "Be the person your younger self needed." And I don't necessarily think that means, if you had a bad childhood or anything like that. It could be that, but also it could just be, was there things that you wish you'd known then that you know now, or things on your journey might have made it a little easier? And I think, well, a lot of people listening into this, hopefully some young people as well, if there's anyone that, aspires to the kind of things you're doing or the journey you've taken, is there anything you would tell your younger self that you know now?
Man. I mean, there's a lot of, like, because I'm also gay, I'm like, gay man. There's a lot of things in relation to that I would say, and awareness I wish I had of myself kind of going into science, even. Like, I was talking about kind of systemic problems in science, and there were, like, I remember even in university, like, being told by kind of older, or like it was almost like an LGBT discussion group in terms of science, and how, science is merit-based and it shouldn't matter, and just, you don't have to tell anybody in the lab and that kind of stuff. And just knowing that, like my career probably would have been different if I would have been a little more aware of myself and able to kind of be myself in that sense early on, I think. I'm very lucky.
Do you feel you were encouraged not to admit who you were?
I think so. I think in like very subtle ways. I mean, I'm very lucky in where I ended up. I ended up, at NASA and young. I started working there. I started in a think tank, when I was like 19 or whatever. But like, still, I think that part of that, like, I don't regret anything. Like, I don't know if I'd change anything. Like, my career has been very kind of organic, and I've
Mm-hmm.
always been somebody who's just like, if it sounds fun and interesting, I'm going to learn something. I'll say yes to the opportunity and that kind of thing. But I think that also, like, I haven't, like, I found spaces where I'm comfortable and I've been happy to stay in those, and didn't look at other options for advancement or other things because I was in a safe space, and that was hard to find to begin with, and a
Yeah.
place that was comfortable. So I think in that sense, that's held me back in certain areas, but I don't think I'd actually change anything either. I also think that I'm lucky that maybe that separated me a bit from that kind of capitalistic approach of like trying to always advance my career and all that kind of stuff, and focus more on what made me happy.
Yeah, man. No, that's inspiring in itself, mate. So yeah, good on you, man. Because you're probably, one of the most positive dudes I've met. Straight off the bat from not knowing anyone and just being in the bar, just oh, what's this beer? What's that beer? And yeah, just super friendly guy and always willing to kind of talk and share your expertise and ask questions about what's going on in the community and stuff. So yeah, man, I'm glad to know you, and I appreciate your time today, man. Is there anywhere you'd like people to check out anything, or would it just be the kind of the work online with the comics and stuff?
Well, I'd say definitely the work online with the comics and stuff. That's
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'll link that in the show notes, mate. But
Well,
yeah, thanks so much for your time today, man, and we'll speak soon.
yeah. Hopefully speak soon in person.
Yeah, man, definitely. I'll give you a shout. Carrie was talking about when you were last at yoga and stuff, and wanting to get involved with the fitness stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just started dragging my lazy ass out for some runs and stuff. So if you want to join, man, I'll message you. I'll message you after this.
Yeah. No, I've actually been trying to. I got up twice this week for a run, but
Good on you, man.
yeah.
I'm shit with the long distance stuff, so I've just been going up the necropolis and doing some kind of
Yeah.
stairs and short sprints and stuff.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah, man. Awesome. Right. Well, I'll give you a message, man. I'll link you up with Nick about the art stuff as well.
Awesome.
Ace. Right. You have a great day, man.
Yeah, you too, man.
Appreciate you, mate. See you later on.
Yep. Bye.
Bye bye.
Yeah, we're talking.